Last weekend was the 4th of July, so big American holiday, you know, celebrating our independence from England and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to paint an appropriate figure for that holiday. And at the same time, I am going to be going on vacation myself in the US starting next week, kind of until the end of the month. And because I'm going to be away, you know, that makes it trickier for me to do videos. So I wanted to find something that I could kind of film and then show you in multiple parts over the next week or so. So that is why I've grabbed this guy. This is a mounted George Washington figure, so super appropriate for the 4th of July. He's by Perry Miniatures. I believe this was a show exclusive at Salute a couple years ago, so you know, you bought several plastic boxes and you would get this guy. The bad news there, of course, is you may or may not actually be able to find him anymore for just sale. But I will link to the website of the Perrys anyway. You might be able to come across him, you know, in any case. So this week I'll be showing you a kind of video on how to paint the horse and the horse fittings. And then next weekend there's going to be a video on painting the general himself. So that way you guys are going to have something to watch, even though I'm not going to be here myself. I'm going to be, in fact, not just vacationing, but visiting Historicon, big wargaming show. I did a whole video on that, and if you're going to Historicon, you can actually meet me there, and that would be really cool. I'll link to more information about that in the description box if you want to know all about Historicon and that kind of thing. So I think that's all for now. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So as promised here, I'm going to be beginning with the horse, and I decided to go for a white horse here for several reasons. First of all, I think you guys will find it useful to see how to paint a white horse. Secondly, because it's pretty common for officers and standard bearers and the like during this period, kind of the 18th century, to use white horses. And thirdly, from a lot of paintings, we know that George Washington actually did often ride a white horse, so we've got a lot of reasons here. I am working from a black undercoat, and yeah, that does make the process a little bit slower since we're going to be putting white over top, but at the same time, it's going to add the possibility for us to build up a lot more different shades and tone more easily. What I'm doing here is applying a base coat of sky gray to the horse, and I'm not at first going to be concerned with how even the coat is. As a matter of fact, you can see to start, it's really blotchy. You can really see a lot of the black undercoat through it. I just want to make sure my coat is pretty even at this point, because then it'll be easier to layer over it. And then I'm just going to start going back and applying more layers of the color in order to smooth it out. And the first 2 layers or so are pretty imprecise. I'm just kind of blobbing it on. I'm not really worrying too much about where the paint goes exactly. When I get to my third kind of layer of the sky gray, I'm going to start paying more attention. I'm going to really start focusing it on areas where I know there's going to be more highlight on the horse, and really sort of just emphasizing those with a thicker layer of paint, so that even though we're going to lighten those areas even further with white and other colors, because we're building this solid light base coat on those areas, it means subsequent colors that we apply to them are still also going to appear lighter and brighter than the areas that don't have so much of the sky gray built up over top of them. The next coat on the horse is now sort of a 50-50 mixture of the sky gray and white. And I'm painting a lot more precisely now, as you can see. I'm applying the paint to areas where I know there needs to be highlight, and then kind of blending it out from there. So, I always, on the legs, for example, I'm always going to start applying paint on the knees and on sort of the ankles of the horse and blending it out from there. And I'm always going to make sure that there's lighter paint sort of on the outside and sort of the insides of the legs and such. They don't need to be as light, so I'm going to kind of blend out into there. Though still at this point with this color, I'm still not going to be really worrying tons and tons, because I'm going to be building up so many more layers over top of it. And I'm going to take this sort of gray-white mix, and just like with the sky gray layer before, I'm going to be applying several coats of it. I think I probably made about 3 passes with this color, just kind of progressively building it up until I'd really gotten sort of the maximum sort of, I guess, saturation possible using this shade. And then after that, I kind of moved on to my next color. Indeed, my next highlight is obviously white, because it's going to be a white horse, and this is the most important highlight you're going to apply. White is, even compared to the grays we just used, quite a transparent color, and I've watered it down so it flows nicely, which means that to really build it up to its maximum intensity is going to take quite a few layers, but that's good. That's what you want. You want to be building it up because that means you can get a lot more sort of shades and tones just using one color of paint, which is good because you'll notice this whole horse we've now really taken and painted one horse using only 3 colors of paint, which is really, really easy, but at the same time still achieve this really smooth, blended look, you know, instead of having to mix tons and tons of sort of sub-shades. So I'm going to go and start with the white, really focusing on applying the white where I want highlights and blending it out really extensively. And as I just, at every sort of successive pass with the white, I'm going to sort of apply it in smaller and smaller areas and really sort of focus it on areas where I want it to look like the light is really catching the horse's flesh. And I'm going to be sort of leaving it off of areas where I think there would be sort of some shadows, like down between sort of muscles and all the sort of definition in its neck, that kind of thing. So you can do this quite a few times before you will have built up the white as bright as it'll go. White can really go very far. But luckily, you can still have a horse that's going to look convincingly very white without having to just build it up until it's sort of, you know, hits you in the eye with how white it is. It's not necessary. It's still going to look plenty white after several layers. And even though we have to do lots and lots of passes with the white, it's not as bad as it sounds because only really the first 1 or 2 passes are going to really force you to paint extensive areas of the horse. The higher highlights are going to be on very select small areas, just increasingly small areas, so you're not really going to have to be, you know, it's not like you're going over the entire horse every time with an equal amount of paint. It's one of these things, and that's always the case with this sort of highlighted, this blended style of highlighting. It gets better every sort of highlight you go up because you're applying sort of less and less paint to a smaller and smaller area with every single layer. Now, one feature that very light gray and white horses very often will have is that the color around sort of their ankles and feet is going to be a darker gray shade, and also often around their muzzle. Those areas will sort of fade out into a darker color. And I'm going to be doing that on this horse as well. So in order to do that here, I'm taking a base coat of Vallejo neutral gray, and you can see I'm just applying sort of real sharp edges here and kind of defining where I want those places to be. Now with the muzzle, it's really easy. You don't have to worry really about blending it because you've got the harness or bridle kind of covering right where that division between the white and gray would be. But with the legs, the ankle sort of things, you're going to have to blend it in because if you look at a horse like this, it's not a sharp transition in this case. When it's on these sort of light horses where they have these sort of darker socks, it's usually sort of more of a blended transition. So that's interesting because now we're blending from a very dark color to a very light color. The easiest way to do this is to go ahead and take that neutral gray once you've applied it and then just mix a little bit of white into it, and you can see that's what I've done, and I sort of apply a stripe of the lighter color around the top, and you can see I'm blending it downwards then into the darker color. At the same time, I'm going to be using these colors that I'm making to blend the anklets in order to just do some highlighting on the muzzle. Even though I don't have to blend it out, I do want to emphasize some areas, so I'm going to blend it out. So I'm going to do that about 2 or 3 times here, just adding in progressive shades of white to lighten my gray, and each time applying it to the very top part of the anklet and blending it downwards into the darker gray. And you can if you have several colors of gray on your palette at the same time, this is a great place to practice some wet blending if you want. So you can apply it and then immediately grab the next shade down and apply it right below and sort of mix the two on the horse. It's a small area where that's easy to do, and it can produce good results, and it's a way that you can really quickly get that blend and kind of help smooth it together faster and more efficiently than you might otherwise. And then because I wanted just a little bit more shade and contrast kind of around the feet and hooves and the sort of darker area, because I felt like the neutral gray wasn't quite dark enough, I'm going to apply a light Nuln Oil wash. And I'm going to be putting that on the muzzle too, and that helps, of course, darken down in the nostrils and the mouth and all of those kind of areas. I'm now going to finish blending the socks into the rest of the leg. I'm using a very, very light gray-white shade to do it. It's pretty thin. You can see I'm just, like I did with the darker gray shades, I'm just going around and sort of blending and smoothing it down into the color. And, you know, ideally then you want to finish up with just some pure white as your final blend. And then once I finished that, and I'm pretty happy with how blended it is, I'm going to go back in and do some final sort of highlighting on both the muzzle and the socks, just using neutral gray and some sort of lighter tones where I need to add a little bit of emphasis. I also ended up getting my socks a little shiny here in the muzzle too, because that Nuln Oil wash was a brand new one, and it was not very well mixed, so it didn't dry matte. And you can kind of see that here. It's not a big deal if that happens. You can fix it either later on in the process with matte varnish, or you can, like I did here, take a very thin coat of the initial color, so neutral gray in this coat, and sort of lightly go over it. And that helps to dull that down quite a bit and sort of get rid of the shine. In this case, it was also useful for, you know, applying some sort of additional subtle highlights over the top of the area that I had just finished shading. Next, I'm going to start handling some really dark gray areas on the horse, which include his hooves here, and then also things like his eyeballs, inside his nostrils, and just sort of the shadow under his eyebrow. I'm going to take this opportunity to kind of paint that and get smooth and nice and even here, because it wasn't before. I just kind of roughed it in, so you want to, you know, get nice, smooth, even lines, and then you can kind of go back over it with white paint as necessary to kind of even it out and make sure it's not too strong. I'm also going to be painting the horse's mane and tail at this point, and I should say I'm doing all of this here with German gray. It doesn't need to be like black. White horses can have a variety of mane and tail colors, obviously, but I opted for this because I like the really strong contrast between the white horse and this very, very dark gray hair color. I'm then going to mix a little bit of neutral gray into my German gray, and I'm going to use that to apply a pretty broad highlight to the hooves and also to the tail, and you can, and mane actually. The way you can see I'm doing that is I'm very lightly overbrushing everything. I really don't want it to get down in all the recesses, so I'm just applying it to the surface, and I'm focusing it more heavily on areas where I expect there to be more light hitting, so like really the top of the tail and the top of the mane. And then I'll go in with even slightly lighter shades, so just adding a little bit more neutral gray in, and I'll use that to put one final bright highlight on the hooves and one final bright highlight on the mane and tail. But that, on the mane and tail in particular, that should be really subtle. You don't need much. You really just want it at the sort of the very top areas. Now the next step is on the mane and tail to apply a very strong Nuln Oil wash everywhere. And this is really important because that gray we applied kind of looks rough and coarse and not very well finished. And in this case, the wash will really pull it together. So I'm applying a general wash, and then I'm going to apply several layers and kind of really focus it on towards the back and underside of the tail to get some extra shading. I really like to apply lots of washes to the mane and tail until I get a really smooth blended look. I usually leave those really subtle. I don't spend a lot of time applying highlights to them because I feel like usually 9 times out of 10 when you do that, it just goes wrong and ends up not looking very good. It's better just to, you know, use some very subtle overbrushing to highlight and then really just use some extensive washing to get a nice unified look and just leave it at that. As tempted as you may be, it almost always wrecks the effect. And so now I'm pretty much done with the horse itself, and I'm going to be moving on to the bridle and saddle and all the tack and stuff. So first I'm going to be painting the harnesses, and as far as I can tell, they should be black on this model. So I am just taking black paint and just base coating all those areas. And nothing complicated here, except you need to take your time and be careful because obviously you're painting black tack on a white horse. So there's some definite, you know, potential to make messes here. Next, I'm going to be highlighting all of the tack. I start out here with just a sort of a rough general highlight of German gray, just to define all of the areas. You can see I'm really only leaving the black as sort of a dividing line between all of the different pieces to really help them stand out. Once I've got the German gray on, it's just really a question of applying progressively lighter shades. So I move from the German gray then into a slightly lighter shade that I make by mixing in some neutral gray to the German gray, and again I'm just going to be applying it to all those stripes. Usually with all of these sort of pieces of leather strapping, I will apply sort of a line always along the tops as much as possible, so because light is usually going to be coming from that way, so then it looks slightly lighter towards the top of all the pieces and then a little bit darker towards the base. And I also often, if there's sort of a curved piece, I'll try to make sort of the middle part lighter so it looks like there's sort of a little bit of a shininess, kind of reflective thing going on there. You want to be careful not to probably over highlight this black leather too much, or it's going to look a little bit too gray. So you don't want to apply too many highlights to it, and I wouldn't make them too stark or let your gray get too light. So I'm going to, after the German gray, I apply usually 2 to 3 highlights. This is my second one, and it's just a slightly lighter shade. It's just almost pure neutral gray, and I'm going to be using. And this one already, I'm going to be applying it pretty sparingly and really being careful really only to focus it sort of on edges and blend it out a lot. You can finish then with one final extra light highlight. You can make that like by mixing some sky gray in or something, and that then you really only want to use very much sort of just touching it at the most extreme edges of the harness where you feel it's necessary, and you don't even have to put it on all pieces. And you know, even though it may seem like that's like almost an unnecessary step, sometimes just adding those little sort of extra shiny areas, even though they're in very limited, can actually just be a nice detail which will help bring the whole thing together. Now I'm going to be painting some sort of brown areas. I should say base coating them. I'm not going to finish them all now, but I'm going to apply the base since it's all the same. And the base I'm using here is German camouflage black brown. So I'm going to apply it right now to the border of his saddle cloth, to the saddle itself, to the sort of and then to the sort of his pistol holsters and sort of the fur coverings over those pistol holders. They're all getting that same brown base coat, and then we'll go back in later and sort of define them separately with various different shades. I'm going to be tackling the saddlecloth trim first. This was kind of usually a gold braid in the case of an officer like Washington, and I prefer to do this in sort of a non-metallic metal style, and don't get all scared when I say that because this is a very limited application of it. It's nothing too intimidating. So what I'm doing here is taking Averland Sunset from Citadel, which I thinned it down a lot, so it's real transparent here, and you can see I'm applying it in a very sort of thin layer over top of my brown, and then once I've got it on, I'll go back on over it a couple times to build it up and get it brighter and more intense in certain areas, and that way, you know, I can make sure I get this sort of nice variable look, again just using one shade or one color, but using it to create a whole variety of different shades. I'm then going to highlight that here, and what I've got here is just some Vallejo buff. Beige would work fine. They're about the same. Again, it's pretty thin down. You can see I'm applying it very transparently over the yellow, and I'm sort of building it up now in areas that I expect would have been shiny, where there would be some glistening and gleaming going on because the light is catching the gold and causing some reflectivity. So, you know, just bright areas. And then you can see then areas that I think would be a little bit darker. I sort of tone it down and sort of blend out into those areas. And I'm making sure, especially along the real extreme edges, there's going to be a really sharp, bright, crisp line of that color. And then finally, to finish off this effect, you want to take some white, and I actually usually mix just a hint of the buff into the white so it's not too stark, and then I'll go back over and just do the same thing, and that'll make it really appear very shiny if you do it carefully. If you apply it specifically to all just the real extreme edges and use it as really an edge highlight, and specifically an edge highlight on edges where light is going to be catching the figure. And if you do this and this is actually with these kinds of sort of non-metallic metal effects, the most important step. You're applying the least of this last shade, but it's the most critical for making it look like shiny metal, because it's really what's emphasizing sort of the shiny reflectiveness of the surface. Next, I'm going to be painting the rest of the saddle cloth, and this would have been a very dark blue color. So I'm base coating it here with a mixture of black and dark Prussian blue. Next, I'm going to take some just Prussian blue and add that into my mixture, or dark Prussian blue, I should say, into that mixture, just to lighten it up a bit. And I'm going to start highlighting over it kind of carefully. And you're going to want to build this up several times. And then after that, I move on up to just pure dark Prussian blue, applied, to areas where light is hitting more. And then you probably want to finish off with one final highlight, which I made by taking just normal Prussian blue and mixing it into my dark Prussian blue and applying that to the lightest surface. You're going to want to be careful and really sparing with that layer here and really blend it out, because that regular Prussian blue is really quite a bright shade, and if you're not careful, it'll just come off as a little bit too, it'll come off as too bright and just too much. So I actually, when I did this, when I first applied it, I applied too light a shade, and it was just too big a transition. So I then went back in, toned that color down, and applied it again, and was really careful to apply it thinly and really blend it out a lot. I'm now going to be working on those brown areas again, getting them finished. The first thing I'm going to do is take some chocolate brown, and I'm going to apply that to every area that's left. So the bottoms of those gun holsters, what's showing in the saddle, which is very little, and also you can see all over sort of the furry covers at the front. I'm then going to mix some beige brown into that chocolate brown, and I'm going to use that to apply a higher highlight to my leather areas. I'm going to apply it nice and thinly and blend it out. Like always when you're painting leather, you want to apply the color more to the edges of the pieces and sort of let it fade out as it goes inwards, so that it looks like there's the most wear on those sort of edge points. And then we'll take some pure beige brown and basically just continue that highlighting process on the leather, and just kind of progressively applying it in thinner lines closer and closer to the edge. You can even then finish with maybe a little bit of Iraqi sand mixed in if you want, for a really extreme edge highlight on those leather areas. Now, as for the fur, I want it to look a little bit different. So what I've done is taken some buff and mixed it into that sort of chocolate brown intermediate shade that I had. And you can see I'm applying it sort of lightly over brushing the surface of the fur. Now, the color I've got there, it's a little bit, I think, a little bit unnatural. I'm not quite happy with it as it is. So I'm going to then kind of tone it down and also help emphasize all the sort of recess and sculpting in that fur by applying a Nuln oil wash pretty generously all over the fur, and that will really help bring out contrast. It'll make that sort of highlight I just applied look a little bit more natural, and really just help tie everything together. There's one kind of final detail to handle here on the horse, and that's sort of like his bit and some little metal fittings on his bridle. These might be kind of a brass bronze, but I looked at some photos, I should say, paintings of Washington. They all showed him having sort of more silver hardware, so that's what I went with here. So I'm just base coating those areas real quickly with a mixture of German gray and gunmetal, and then I'm just going to highlight real briefly with first just pure gunmetal, Vallejo Air gunmetal that is, and then Vallejo Air steel over top. Okay, so here is our finished white horse for General Washington. I'm really happy with how the horse came out. haven't painted a white horse in quite a long time, and this is the first time I've also done it using my sort of new white over black painting technique, and I'm really happy with the results. I'm not saying it was necessarily the quickest method, but then again, when it comes to painting horses, I found that you never get good results quickly. It's almost always going to take a while if you want this blended look, but I think this worked out very nice. They also really like how the tack looked, and I'm really looking forward to finishing off this figure, which is what I'm going to be doing in part 2 of the video. Next week I'll be showing you how to paint General Washington in his uniform and finish everything off. So again, if you like this video, please like it, share it, leave me comments, let me know what you thought. Subscribe to my channel if you have not already, and once again, do please tune in next week here to watch the conclusion of this video. So that's all for now, and I will see you next time.